This talk is for anybody that has a human body. So anyone listening, it's for you. I think as a person who's been teaching anatomy and physiology for decades and trying to excite people and inform people, and in my line of work, it's health professionals generally, working from pre-med, nursing, and fitness professionals. But it's always the same. If you want to have an impact on a human body, you can't look at the human body as a whole. You have to break it down to its fundamental parts. And of course, the most fundamental part of a human body is the cell. We forget that the cell is, in and of itself, a living organism. So each cell has the characteristics of life that you, the larger organism, have. If we contemplate this and we think about cells before we developed complex organisms, you can go to a puddle today, take out an eyedropper and take a drop of puddle water, put it under a microscope, and you can see these cells, amoeboids, ciliates, and flagella. And these cells live independently in the water. And those cells have all the 7 characteristics, or depending on how you look at it, all the characteristics that you, the larger animal, have. They're a living being, and they're the smallest form or the smallest unit of life that we know of. There are many ways that you can go about trying to decide how many cells are in a human body. Mathematicians have tried a variety of methods, and the exact number has not been decided upon yet. But for our sake, I'm going to settle on the number 40 trillion. It's one of the measures that they've come up with. And I think that the number 40 trillion is a number we can kind of get our minds around. But 40 trillion cells is a lot of cells. And we have about 4 times as many bacteria. So when we look at our bodies and we think about who we are, we're 40 trillion strong. I wake up every morning of my life and that's the first thing I say. How you guys doing? And I address the 40 trillion strong, which is the life force of my body. I myself and you yourself have no life force. Each cell within your body has a life force. And if we put all 40 trillion cells together, we have our life force. That's how the body works. To keep it in a kind of a concise type of way, if we contemplate being a health professional or we contemplate being our own healthcare provider by taking on better dieting or exercise programs or involving ourselves with some form of spiritual worship, these are all things that we do that bring health to our bodies. But what we're doing is we're addressing our cellular reality. This concept is rather interesting, and lately we've been doing some science in the world that explains this in a way that I think is immeasurably clear. But let's stop for a moment and contemplate that we have 4 different types of tissues in the body. And the nervous tissue is made up of nerve cells. They're excitatory, they have electrical impulses. And then we have muscle tissue. Muscle tissue is made of contractile proteins. Then we have connective tissues, which is a wide variety of tissue, going from solid, which is bone, to fluid, which is blood, and compressible materials that have a lot of tensile strength, like ligaments and tendons. We also have adipose cells. These are all connective tissue cells. And then with all of these different cell types that we possess within the human body, these cells have different needs. They have different characteristics. So this gives us rise to looking at the nervous system. The nervous system has 2 basic systems. The somatic system, which is conscious, and you can control that, and it controls the skeletal muscles. And then there's the autonomic system. The autonomic system is listening to the cells. The cells call the shots. The vast majority of our brain and our nervous system is related towards the autonomic responses, the listening to the cell. And that when the cell needs something, it informs the brain, and you apply skeletal muscle activity to do what the cell asked you to do. If you decide in a few minutes that you feel a little bit warm and you take off your coat or your jacket or your sweater to get cooler, that was your cells telling you, my cellular life requires change, and you did it. When we start to contemplate this then, and we see that in and of ourselves, We respond every day to the cellular life, the 40 trillion strong that are in our bodies. And it's understanding that and being able to deal with those 40 trillion strong that make you effective as a healthcare performer or practitioner, whether it's professional or you yourself upon yourself. So we're going to contemplate this a little bit more. And I'm going to bring up two examples that will clearly show what this impact of the cellular life actually is and what it means. And I'm going to use two examples. I'm going to use one that is natural, the slime mold, and the other, which is alien to into our world. And I'm going to explain why it's alien in a moment. But if we think of the slime mold is a single celled creature. And research on slime molds show that, amazingly, they're brilliant. They can escape from places, they can figure out puzzles, they can learn, they can pass on the learning to other slime molds. The science on this is really quite fascinating. That this single cell organism, which can go from a small little minute organism to it can grow to a massive size, that these slime molds can and do function as a living being. They represent and show the characteristics of life that you or I would. They don't go shopping for groceries so much, but they do go looking for food. And if you put the food in a complex puzzle, they'll find their way through that complex puzzle to get the food. They're brilliant that way for a slime mold and a single celled organism. But they have shown that without a doubt, it has the ability to think, respond, and react to the world around it. This is a single cell organism, like the cells in our body, the 40 trillion strong. It has its own sense of life. It has its own understanding of what it's required, and it attempts to do that all the time. So let's go and jump to the alien cell and have another look at the power of the cell. There has been something that's been created called a xenobot. Now, a xenobot, wow, xeno means alien, and a bot, of course, robot. How do we make an alien robot? Well, we don't make it for starters. We ask a supercomputer to do it. And what happens is that using just frog heart cells and frog skin cells, just those two types of cells, they asked a supercomputer, we want you to make a robot that can go back and forth across the bottom of a petri dish. So the supercomputer went to work and produced a couple of thousand what it thought were working models. The scientists applied their intellect to it and came up with one specific model that they were going to try. Then they gave this over to a specialist in cell structure or cell combination connection, and he was able to connect the cells. Once they had connected the cells in the way that the supercomputer said, they put it in the petri dish, and away it went. And sure enough, back and forth across the petri dish, this little xenobot would go. Amazing. So then they thought, well, what if we put things in there with it? So they put in some carbon granules. And these carbon granules, the xenobot, would immediately push them all into nice, neat piles. No one ever trained the xenobot to do this. No one said, hey, xenobot, this is what we want you to do. Nobody knew what the xenobot would do. It's just a random bunch of cells put into a design that was designed by a supercomputer. And there it goes. And if you put a whole bunch of xenobots, they work as a team to put all the little granules into nice, neat little piles. So they all get together and they all work on making sure that it's all a nice, neat pile. So when we look at what's happening there, we're looking at the fact that this has no nervous system, that is just cells within that robot. And the cells themselves, just the life force of the cell, is driving that robot to do things. It's driving it to do things. It's driving it to take life on. So let's contemplate those two ideas. The idea of a slime mold being this intelligent single cell organism that, when left alone in the forest where it lives, will move about and cleverly live its life, finding food, escaping from places where it's trapped, and figuring out mazes. And then we can look at the xenobot, and we can look at just the life force of those cells is giving it purpose, making it take on tasks and perform tasks that it wasn't designed particularly to do, but it's doing it because the cellular life force itself is charging that. So what does this mean to you as a person? I think it means a lot. explains a lot of things. Sometimes, you'll get this feeling in yourself. You'll feel like, I am so incredibly thirsty. And off you'll go get a drink of water. Where is that? Wow, am I thirsty come from? It didn't come from your brain. It came from your cells. Your cells are dehydrated. They're screaming at you. Now, they're screaming at you because, of course, they go through certain physiological transactions and chemical uh, synapses happen and all of that. And I'm not going to get into that. I'll bore you. But there are many things that are occurring that will signal the body that it's thirsty. But the cells being dehydrated are the ones that are doing that. Fear. What do you get fear from? Somehow your cells are feeling like they're in danger. So you feel fear. Those primordial feelings, those gut wrenching feelings that you get about things in your life, that is the cellular reality, the cellular life force screaming out to you. So now, as a person who worked as a exercise rehabilitation therapist for many years and helped to heal bodies and worked as a personal trainer, I know that when I look to affect the human body, I look at what is the cellular reality of the organ systems that I'm working at and trying to affect. And if I can look at what the cellular reality, and if I'm looking at a soft tissue injury that's related to a tendon, and I look at what is the cellular reality of a tendon, what is a tendon, and what are the cells they're doing? Well, it turns out that in a tendon, a cell lives inside of something called a lacunae, and it's a little space. It's like a jail cell, if you will, right? And it's locked into something. Now we call that ground matrix. Now, ground matrix is made up of two things: protein and ground substance. So ground substance can change a lot. If you're a bone, ground substance is cement, calcium phosphate. So the cell within a bone lives in a lacunae, a little space, a little home that's within the concrete. And that's where it lives its life. And its job is to maintain the concrete structure around it. But it lives its life as if in a jail cell. And it communicates down these long little tunnels to the other cells called canaliculi. So these canaliculi, little canals, are from one cell to the other, but that's how they live their lives. So how do we affect that cell? Well, that cell's job is to develop the calcium phosphate that surrounds it and maintain, therefore, the bone. So if we're maintaining that cell, we're trying to give it what it needs to maintain the bone, which is calcium and phosphate. So if we can do that, if we can deliver that to the cell along with other nutrients to keep itself alive, then it can maintain the cell and keep itself alive. And we have observed what is the cellular reality of that cell and delivered to that cell what it needs. Let's go back to the tendon. Tendon is a different type of connective tissue. It's compressible. So it has something called proteoglycan aggregate. Big word, doesn't matter. It's like a gel pack, right? So it's like gel pack. It's got compressibility. So it's this cell that's in the tendon, it needs to provide that gel pack. Now we need fluid motion. So oftentimes when we have a tendon damage or crushing like that, we end up getting dehydration in the tendon and we don't get fluid flow through the tendon. And we have a breakup of the ability of those cells to function properly. And we get inflammation and swelling, and inflammation and swelling causes cell death. So as we start to look at the cell and we look at the problem, but we look at it from the cell itself. What is the cell doing? How do I affect the cell? How do I, if I want to improve that tendon, I have to fix that rebuild the ground substance. So the cell is going to do that. So if I can find a way to heal those cells and nourish those cells, then that ground substance will be replaced and the tendon will heal and life gets better fast. So contemplating cellular reality, epithelial tissue, another cell type, skin. Remember that skin is on the outside, but skin's on the inside. You're like a donut hole, right? You got a hole that comes in here and, comes out the other end. So we have a hole right through the middle of us, and that hole is lined with skin, just like the outside is lined with skin. So when we contemplate that, if we're looking at digestion, if we're looking at defecation, urination, all of these wonderful things that we do, they're all directly related to the health of the skin that surrounds those tubes, whether it's the colon, whether it's the rectum, whether it's the urethra, whether it's the small intestine. All of these things are lined with skin. And so therefore the health of the skin becomes really, really important, not only exterior skin, but internal skin. Remember that the inside of your body starts after you pass skin. When something enters your mouth, it doesn't enter the inside of your body. That's still the outside world. And the hole that runs right through your body is the outside world. You have to cross the skin barrier to actually enter the body. So put something in your mouth, it travels via the outside world, but within the internal body, and then exits external body into the outside world. But it's been in the outside world the whole time. Contemplate that then, that the skin is what allows things to enter the body. You have to pass that level, whether it's in the lung when you breathe air, whether the carbon dioxide and oxygen pass the barrier, that's a cell. It has to pass through that cell, that skin cell. So healthy lungs, healthy skin cells. So when we contemplate the human body, we contemplate applying ourselves, whether, as I said, you're applying yourself as a professional or whether you're applying yourself as an individual, this idea of health relates entirely to your understanding that you are a cellular being, 40 trillion strong, and that by adapting yourself to this concept, that you deal with the cellular reality and therefore have an impact on the organism, you as a whole, is the most important thing you can do. Thank you for listening.